The first time I saw the picture, I almost dropped my coffee. My ex-husband Daniel stood beside a shiny black Mercedes, smiling like he had won at life. His arm wrapped around a younger woman, expensive watch, luxury suit, perfect white smile, and underneath the photo, his caption said, "Funny how life improves when toxic people leave." Thousands of people liked it, friends, old co-workers, even people who knew me personally. I stared at the screen while my chest burned. Not because I still loved him. That part died long ago. What hurt was the lie. Because Daniel bragged online about his successful new life. I was sitting in a tiny apartment trying to recover financially after the divorce he caused. And the worst part? Most people believed him. That's the dangerous thing about charming men. They know how to control public perception long before truth catches up. At that moment, I had no idea one phone call would eventually destroy everything he built. But it would. And honestly, he deserved every second of it. My name is Vanessa Carter. I was 42 years old when my marriage ended, and for a long time, I blamed myself for it. Daniel and I had been married for 18 years. We had one daughter, Sophie, and from the outside, we looked successful. Beautiful home, vacation pictures, dinner parties, anniversary posts online. But appearances are dangerous, because sometimes the couples smiling hardest in public are barely surviving privately. Daniel loved appearances. He loved attention, validation, admiration. And slowly, over the years, I became less of a wife and more of a supporting character in his performance. At first, I ignored the changes. Longer work nights, secretive phone calls, sudden obsession with expensive clothes. But deep down, I already knew something was wrong long before I found proof. Women usually know. We just pray we're wrong. I discovered the affair accidentally, not through messages, not through lipstick stains, through reflection. One night, Daniel left his laptop open during a company event live stream. I was trying to send Sophie's school paperwork when a video notification appeared automatically. At first, I ignored it. Then curiosity won. And suddenly, I saw my husband laughing beside a woman in a red dress. Not ordinary laughter, intimate laughter, comfortable laughter. The kind people only share when emotional boundaries have already disappeared. Then the woman touched his tie gently, and Daniel smiled at her the way he used to smile at me years ago. My stomach dropped instantly. I remember replaying that short clip at least 15 times, trying to convince myself I misunderstood. But denial only delays pain. It never removes it. When Daniel came home that night, I asked him directly, "Who is she?" The question froze him immediately. That told me everything. Because innocent people react with confusion. Guilty people react with fear. At first, he denied everything, then minimized it, then blamed stress. Classic progression. Finally, after nearly an hour of arguing, he admitted the truth. Her name was Rachel, 31. I worked in marketing, and according to Daniel, she understands me better. That sentence shattered something inside me. Because after 18 years together, after sacrificing my own career growth to support our family, I was suddenly being compared to someone new and exciting, someone untouched by real responsibility. And honestly, that kind of betrayal changes how you see yourself for a while. The divorce moved fast, too fast. Daniel already seemed emotionally prepared. That should have warned me immediately, because people who move on quickly usually start leaving emotionally long before they admit it. He kept the house temporarily. I moved into a smaller apartment with Sophie, and financially, I struggled badly. Not because Daniel lacked money, because he knew exactly how to manipulate appearances during legal discussions. He claimed business instability, investment losses, temporary financial setbacks, and unfortunately, I believed him. Or maybe I was too emotionally exhausted to fight harder. Either way, I walked away with far less than I deserved. Meanwhile, Daniel continued building his shiny public image online. Luxury restaurants, trips, parties, designer suits, new girlfriend, new life. And every post felt like another insult. The person who suffered most quietly was my daughter. Sophie was 16 when the divorce happened, old enough to understand betrayal, young enough to still hope her parents might somehow fix things. At first, she tried staying neutral, calling both of us equally, visiting Daniel every other weekend, pretending everything felt normal. But children absorb tension even when adults hide it. One evening, she looked at me while helping unpack boxes and quietly asked, "Was Dad unhappy with us?" That question nearly broke me, because no child should feel responsible for adult selfishness. I immediately hugged her tightly. "This was never your fault." But honestly, I wasn't sure she fully believed me. And deep down, neither did I yet. About 6 months after the divorce, Daniel became unbearable online. Every week there was another photo, another brag, another fake inspirational quote about freedom and choosing happiness. Meanwhile, I worked extra accounting shifts trying to rebuild financially. There were nights I cried quietly after Sophie fell asleep because I felt completely replaced. Not just romantically, socially, emotionally, publicly. And the most humiliating part? Mutual friends slowly drifted toward Daniel's version of events, because he controlled the narrative first. According to him, I was emotionally cold, negative, unsupportive. Meanwhile, he painted Rachel as the woman who saved him. People love redemption stories, even fake ones. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was leaving work when my lawyer, Melissa, called unexpectedly. At first, I assumed it involved routine custody paperwork, but her tone sounded different. Seriously. "Vanessa," she said carefully, "I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning." My stomach tightened immediately. What happened? Long pause. Then she asked a question that confused me completely. "Did Daniel ever mention overseas accounts during your divorce proceedings?" I stopped walking instantly. "No." Silence. Then Melissa said the sentence that changed my entire future. "I think your ex-husband hid assets." The next morning, Melissa explained everything carefully. Apparently, during an unrelated business investigation involving one of Daniel's former partners, financial documents surfaced unexpectedly, and Daniel's name appeared repeatedly. Investment transfers, hidden income, foreign holdings, money never disclosed during our divorce settlement. My entire body went cold hearing it, because suddenly, everything made sense. The fake financial struggles, the rushed settlement, the emotional pressure to avoid lengthy court battles. Daniel didn't just betray our marriage, he manipulated the legal process too. And for the first time since the divorce, I stopped feeling powerless. Melissa looked directly at me and asked quietly, "Do you want to reopen the settlement?" I stared out the office window for a long moment. Honestly, part of me wanted peace, to move on quietly. But then I remembered Daniel humiliating me publicly online while secretly hiding money from the mother of his child. And suddenly, something shifted inside me. Not bitterness, clarity. "Yes," I answered calmly. And that single word started the collapse of Daniel's perfect new life. 3 weeks later, Daniel received the official legal notice. According to Sophie, he completely panicked. Apparently, Rachel was at the house when the documents arrived. Daniel started yelling immediately, making frantic phone calls, locking himself in his office for hours. And honestly, that was the first moment I truly smiled in months. Not because I enjoy revenge, because the truth finally entered the room. Then came the moment Daniel would later describe as the worst day of his life. Melissa called him directly, professional, cold, precise. She informed him the hidden assets were now under legal review, and unless properly explained, the court could reconsider major portions of our settlement agreement. According to his attorney later, Daniel went completely silent during most of the call, because men like Daniel survive on confidence, and confidence disappears fast when exposure begins. That night, Daniel sent me his first emotional message in nearly a year. No apology, not accountability, just fear. Vanessa, we need to talk. And for the first time since our marriage collapsed, I finally realized something important. My ex-husband was no longer controlling the story. Daniel called me 6 times that night. I ignored every single one. Then came the texts. Please answer. This isn't what you think. We can fix this privately. That last message almost made me laugh. Privately. Interesting words. Because Daniel loved public attention when he looked successful. But suddenly, when the truth threatened his image, he wanted privacy. I sat on my couch staring at the phone while rain hit the windows outside. And honestly, for the first time in nearly 2 years, I felt emotionally calm. Not happy, not vindictive, just calm. Because the power dynamic had finally changed. The next weekend, Sophie returned from visiting her father unusually quiet. I immediately knew something happened. After dinner, she finally spoke. Dad was screaming at Rachel. My chest tightened. Apparently, Daniel spent the entire weekend stressed about the legal situation. Phone calls nonstop, meetings canceled, constant arguments, and for the first time, his perfect image around Rachel started cracking. He kept saying someone betrayed him, Sophie whispered. That sentence stunned me, because even now, Daniel still saw himself as the victim, not the man who secretly hid money during a divorce while publicly humiliating his ex-wife. That level of emotional dishonesty shocked even me. A few days later, Rachel contacted me unexpectedly. At first, I almost ignored her message completely, but curiosity won. We met at a quiet coffee shop downtown, and honestly, she looked exhausted. Not glamorous, not confident, just emotionally overwhelmed. I didn't know, she said immediately. I stayed silent. Then she continued nervously. He told me the divorce was financially fair. There it was again. Daniel's carefully constructed version of reality. Apparently, Rachel believed he became successful after leaving an emotionally draining marriage. Meanwhile, most of his financial growth came from hiding assets before our divorce finalized. The irony was painful. The woman who thought she won my husband was slowly discovering she inherited his dishonesty too. People online eventually notice inconsistency, especially when someone performs happiness too aggressively. Daniel's posts became stranger after the legal notice arrived. Forced smiles, motivational quotes every day, photos that looked staged instead of natural. And little by little, comments started changing. You okay, man? You seem stressed lately. Is everything good with the business? That's the thing about fake perfection. Maintaining it becomes exhausting eventually, and once pressure enters the picture, the cracks appear fast. Melissa invited me back to her office 2 weeks later. This time she looked almost shocked herself. She placed several folders carefully across the table. Inside were bank records, transfer histories, investment summaries, property documents, and as I read through them, my hands physically shook. Daniel hadn't hidden thousands. He hid hundreds of thousands. Money moved slowly across multiple accounts during the final year of our marriage. Money that absolutely should have been disclosed legally. I stared at the paperwork while my chest burned, not because of greed, because Sophie and I struggled financially after the divorce. Daniel was posting luxury vacations online funded partly by deception. That realization changed something inside me permanently. I sat alone in my tiny apartment looking around differently. The old couch, the secondhand dining table, the cheap curtains I bought during clearance sales. And suddenly, I remembered all the nights I blamed myself for our financial struggles. All the times I wondered if I failed somehow. Meanwhile, Daniel had resources hidden the entire time. Do you know what hurts most about betrayal? Not the money, not even the lying. It's discovering your suffering was unnecessary to someone who claimed to love you. That kind of realization stays with you. About a month later, Daniel hosted a large dinner party at his house. Business friends, social media acquaintances, local professionals, the usual audience for his performance. But according to Rachel later, everything went wrong. Apparently, one guest casually mentioned hearing rumors about financial investigations. The room became quiet instantly. Daniel laughed nervously. I tried changing the subject, but once suspicion enters public conversation, people become observant fast. Questions started coming carefully. And Daniel? He panicked. Rachel said he became defensive immediately, aggressive, unstable. And suddenly, the charming, successful businessman image started collapsing publicly in real time. The worst moment came later that night. Sophie accidentally overheard Daniel arguing with Rachel upstairs. Apparently, Rachel confronted him directly. "You told me Vanessa got most of the money." Silence. Then Daniel shouted something that permanently damaged his relationship with our daughter. "She wouldn't have understood my plans anyway." When Sophie repeated those words to me later, I felt physically sick. Because after 18 years together, after raising his child, Daniel still spoke about me like I was some obstacle instead of a human being. And honestly, that's when Sophie emotionally stopped defending him too. Eventually, the court hearing was officially scheduled, and suddenly Daniel's confidence disappeared completely. His attorney tried negotiating privately multiple times. Settlement offers, confidential agreements, quiet resolutions. But Melissa remained firm, because once deception enters legal proceedings, judges take it seriously, especially when family finances are involved. The night before court, Daniel sent me another message. It's been a long time, emotional, almost desperate. We were unhappy for years. I made mistakes. You don't have to destroy me. Destroy him. Interesting phrase. Because Daniel still didn't understand something important. Truth revealing consequences is not destruction. It's accountability. Walking into court beside Melissa felt surreal. Daniel sat across the room looking older somehow, smaller. Rachel wasn't there. Neither were most of his social friends. Funny how quickly audiences disappear once performances collapse. The hearing itself lasted hours. Financial experts, documentation, transfer histories, timeline reviews, and slowly, the truth unfolded publicly. The judge remained calm throughout most of it, until one specific moment. Melissa presented evidence showing Daniel transferred large amounts of money shortly before finalizing our divorce settlement. The courtroom became completely silent. Then the judge looked directly at Daniel and asked, "Why were these accounts not disclosed?" Daniel couldn't answer clearly. And honestly, that silence said everything. Watching Daniel during the hearing felt strange emotionally. Part of me still remembered the man I married, the man who once held my hand during difficult years. But sitting there watching him struggle under the weight of his own lies, I realized something painful. That version of Daniel disappeared long before our divorce. Maybe long before the affair even started. because people don't suddenly become dishonest overnight. They slowly compromise themselves one decision at a time, until eventually, they no longer recognize who they became. Several weeks later, the decision arrived. The original settlement would be significantly adjusted, financial penalties applied, additional compensation ordered, and portions of Daniel's hidden holdings were now subject to legal review. When Melissa called with the update, I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just sat quietly breathing for a long moment. Because after nearly 2 years of humiliation, confusion, and emotional pain, someone finally acknowledged the truth officially. And honestly, that mattered more than the money ever could. Eventually, rumors spread socially. Not dramatic headlines, just quiet conversations, whispers, questions. People who once praised Daniel online started distancing themselves slowly. His motivational posts stopped completely. The luxury photos disappeared. Even Rachel stopped appearing publicly beside him. Because once someone's image depends entirely on illusion, exposure becomes devastating. And Daniel built his entire identity around image. Without it, he seemed lost. One evening, Sophie finally confronted her father directly. She told me afterward while crying. Apparently, she asked him one simple question. Why was looking successful more important than being honest? Daniel broke down emotionally. But Sophie said something that stunned even me. You didn't just lie to Mom, she whispered to him. You lied to yourself. And honestly, that may have been the most accurate thing anyone ever said about him. A week later, Daniel appeared at my apartment unexpectedly. No expensive suits, no confident smile, no performance, just exhaustion, and standing there in silence. My ex-husband quietly admitted something I never expected to hear. I think I ruined my own life trying to prove I had a better one. When I opened the apartment door that night, I barely recognized Daniel. Not physically, emotionally. The man standing in front of me looked exhausted in a way expensive clothes could never hide. His shoulders slumped. My eyes are tired. The voice was quieter than I had ever heard it before. For years, Daniel walked through life like someone performing for an invisible audience. Confident smile, perfect posture, carefully chosen words. But now, the performance was gone. And honestly, that scared him more than losing money ever could. Because once people stop admiring someone like Daniel, they're forced to sit alone with themselves. And many people spend their entire lives avoiding that moment. I invited him inside mostly because Sophie was still out with friends. And part of me needed closure too. For a while, neither of us spoke. The apartment felt strangely quiet, smaller than the home we once shared, simpler, but peaceful. Daniel looked around slowly before whispering, "You made this place feel more like home than our house ever did." That sentence caught me off guard, because for years, I believed losing the house meant losing stability. But stability was never the building. It was the emotional safety inside it. And honestly, that safety disappeared long before the divorce happened. Daniel sat down carefully and rubbed his hands together nervously. Then finally, he said the sentence I think he avoided his entire life. I was jealous of you. I frowned immediately. Jealous? Of me? The exhausted wife working constantly while he lived publicly glamorous? But then he explained. You always knew who you were, he whispered. I needed people to tell me who I was. That sentence stayed with me deeply, because suddenly everything made sense. The social media obsession, the luxury image, the affair, the constant need for validation. Daniel wasn't chasing happiness. He was chasing approval. And people who build their identity around approval eventually become emotionally empty. No amount of attention ever feels enough. A few days later, Sophie called me unexpectedly after school. Rachel moved out. I stayed silent for a moment. Not surprised, just sad. Apparently, the legal stress, public embarrassment, and financial exposure destroyed whatever fantasy relationship they once had. Because affairs often survive on illusion, secret excitement, escaping reality. But once consequences arrive, real compatibility finally gets tested. And according to Sophie, they failed that test quickly. Rachel apparently told Daniel something painful before leaving. You cared more about looking successful than being honest with anyone. Honestly? That sentence described his entire life perfectly. Over the next few months, Daniel's social circle shrank dramatically. The people who once crowded his parties stopped calling. Business acquaintances disappeared. Dinner invitations stopped. Even online interactions became quieter. Because relationships built around image rarely survive humiliation. And slowly, Daniel started realizing something devastating. Most people around him never actually knew him. They knew the version he performed. That realization broke him emotionally more than the court ever did. One afternoon during a custody discussion, he admitted quietly, I spent years trying to impress people who vanished the moment things became difficult. I looked at him for a long moment before answering softly, that's because admiration isn't the same thing as love. And honestly, I think that was the first time he truly understood the difference. The person I worried about most through everything was Sophie. But slowly, she started changing too. Healing, growing. One evening she sat beside me while we watched television and suddenly said, I used to think perfect families were real. I smiled sadly. Most families are just people trying their best. She nodded quietly, then whispered, I think Dad cared more about being admired than being close to us. That sentence hurt because it was true. Daniel loved externally, through gifts, appearances, performances. But emotional presence, honesty, stability, those things require vulnerability. And vulnerability terrified him. Ironically, the moment Daniel lost control publicly happened completely by accident. One of his old motivational posts resurfaced online. The same arrogant post about toxic people leaving your life. Except this time, people knew the context behind it. Comments exploded quickly, not hateful, just disappointed. You mean the wife you hid money from? Interesting definition of success. Your ex deserved better. Daniel called me later, sounding emotionally crushed. Everyone thinks I'm a fraud. I stayed quiet for a moment, then answered honestly. Because you spent years pretending instead of living truthfully. He didn't argue. Because finally, he knew it too. People think revenge stories always end with hatred. Mine didn't. One quiet afternoon, Daniel and I attended Sophie's school ceremony together. Nothing dramatic happened. No arguments, no emotional speeches. We simply sat beside each other peacefully for the first time in years. And while watching our daughter smile on stage, I suddenly realized something surprising. I didn't hate him anymore. Not because he deserved forgiveness, because carrying anger had exhausted me long enough. And honestly, healing begins the moment someone else's mistakes stop controlling your emotional life. That was the day I finally became free. About a year after the court case, Daniel experienced what I can only describe as emotional collapse. Not publicly, privately. He called me late one evening sounding completely broken. I don't know who I am anymore. That sentence hit me harder than expected. Because underneath all the arrogance, Daniel was deeply lost. He spent so many years performing happiness that he never built real peace inside himself. And eventually, Fake confidence collapses under pressure. Always. He admitted something that night I never expected to hear. I thought if people admired me enough, I would finally feel valuable. Silence filled the phone call. Then I quietly asked, "Did it work?" Long pause. Then his voice cracked. "No." Meanwhile, my own life slowly became beautiful again. Not flashy, not luxurious, real, peaceful mornings, stable finances, small dinner nights with Sophie, quiet happiness. And honestly, after years of emotional chaos, peace felt more valuable than excitement ever could. I even started laughing differently, naturally, without forcing it, without pretending everything was fine. One afternoon, while organizing old paperwork, I found an old photo from our marriage. Daniel and I smiled together during a beach trip years earlier. For a moment, sadness hit me unexpectedly, because we weren't always broken. That's the hardest truth about relationships sometimes. People can love each other genuinely and still destroy everything through selfishness, insecurity, and dishonesty. The most important moment came nearly 2 years later. Sophie graduated high school with honors. After the ceremony, Daniel hugged her tightly while crying quietly. Then Sophie said something that stunned both of us. "I forgive you, Dad." Daniel broke down completely hearing that. But then she added softly, "Just don't spend your life pretending anymore." And honestly, that sentence became the emotional ending of our entire story. Because pretending destroyed everything. Not failure, not struggle, not mistakes. Pretending. A few weeks later, Daniel and I had one final meaningful conversation. We sat outside a small cafe while the city moved around us quietly. No anger remained between us anymore. Just history, lessons, scars. Daniel looked older now, softer somehow, more honest. Then suddenly he asked, "Do you regret marrying me?" That question surprised me. I thought carefully before answering. "No," I said honestly. "I regret how long we both ignored who you were becoming." He nodded slowly, then whispered, "I think I spent my whole life trying to look successful instead of becoming emotionally healthy." And honestly, that may have been the most truthful sentence he ever spoke. People think revenge means destroying someone publicly. But real revenge is quieter than that. Real revenge is rebuilding your peace while the person who betrayed you realizes they destroyed their own happiness chasing appearances. I didn't ruin Daniel's life. His lies did that. His insecurity did that. His obsession with image did that. I simply stopped protecting him from consequences. And eventually, truth handled the rest. Because no matter how beautiful someone makes their life look publicly, a fake life eventually collapses under its own weight. Always. My ex bragged online about his perfect new life while hiding lies behind expensive smiles and staged photos. But one phone call from my lawyer exposed the truth he spent years trying to protect. And in the end, losing his image hurt him far more than losing me ever did.